In Part 4 of our guides we will look at the different types of appeal and briefly explain the rules for each type. There are two basic types of appeal that we will look at individually. It is important to understand which type your case will be heard under as the process is slightly different. There are also some other variations which we will discuss here. Chapter 1, The Types of Appeal. Is there a duty to comply with parental preference? Local authorities are under an obligation to comply with the wishes of a parent in expressing a preference for a particular school, unless it would prejudice the provision of education or the efficient use of resources. Therefore, parents have a right to express a preference for the school they want their child to attend, but do not have a right for their child to attend that particular school. If a school is undersubscribed, then any parent that applies must be offered a place. When oversubscribed, the admission authority must rank applications in order against its published oversubscription criteria. Some children therefore do not get a place at the school they would like, and this is how appeals can occur. The first type of appeal we will look at is called infant class size. If your child will be entering primary school in year 1 or year 2, the appeal will be heard under the infant class size appeal. Infant classes, those where the majority of children will reach the age of 5, 6 or 7 during the school year, must not contain more than 30 pupils with a single qualified school teacher. Additional children may be admitted under limited exceptional circumstances. These children will remain an accepted pupil for the time they are in an infant class or until the class numbers fall back to the current infant class size limit. When reviewing an infant class size appeal, the only criteria that the panel can consider is an error in the process or procedures or irrationality of the authority decision. Hence the panel must consider whether the admission arrangements complied with the mandatory code, whether those admission arrangements were correctly and impartially applied, whether the decision to refuse the place was one which was reasonable. For your appeal to succeed, you must prove one of these things was incorrect. If you are trying to appeal on any other basis, you are highly unlikely to succeed. For all other appeals that are not covered by infant class size, the panel must follow what is known as the two-stage process. The first stage looks at the decision to refuse admission and whether the admission complied with the mandatory requirements of the School Admissions Code and Part 3 of the School Standards and Framework Act 1998, and also whether the admission arrangements were correctly and impartially applied in the case in question. The panel must then decide whether the admission of additional children would prejudice the provision of efficient education or the efficient use of resources. If it's found either of these, the panel must pass to the second stage. The panel must balance the prejudice to the school against the appellant's case for the child to be admitted to the school. It must take into account the appellant's reasons for expressing a preference for the school, including what that school can offer the child that the allocated or other schools cannot. If the panel considers that the appellant's case outweighs the prejudice to the school, it must uphold the appeal. In-year appeals are basically appeals where the child didn't form part of the normal admission round, for example a family that is moving into the area. Parents usually are allowed to express up to 4 preferences. Each preference is considered against the admission authority's oversubscription criteria. If you are not happy with the school allocated, you have the right to appeal. However, the appeals are still classed as either infant class size or normal prejudice and follow exactly the same process and procedures. Children and their parents applying for sixth form places may use the normal application form. Admission authorities can, however, set academic entry criteria for their sixth forms, which must be the same for both external and internal places. School sixth form admission arrangements for external applicants must be consulted on, determined and published in accordance with the same timetable as for admission arrangements for other entry points. As with other points of entry to schools, highest priority in oversubscription criteria for sixth form places must be given to looked after children and previously looked after children who meet the academic entry criteria. Any meetings held to discuss options and courses must not form part of the decision process on whether to offer a place. An appeal in absence is one where you do not attend. This is simply where you fail, or are unable to attend, and it is impractical to offer an alternative date. The appeal may go ahead and be decided based on the written information you have submitted. The process will be the same and the panel will still hear the authority's case, Review the documentation you have submitted and question the authority. Multiple appeals are when a number of appeals have been received in relation to the same school. Admission authorities must take all reasonable steps to ensure that multiple appeals for a school are heard by one panel with the same members. A panel hearing multiple appeals must not make decisions on any of those appeals until all the appeals have been heard. Multiple appeals may be heard either individually or in groups. Hearing multiple appeals individually means holding a series of consecutive appeal hearings. The panel must ensure that the presenting officer does not produce new evidence in later appeals that was not presented earlier, as this would mean that appellants whose cases were heard earlier in the process would not have the opportunity to consider and respond to the new evidence. If material new evidence comes to light during the questioning of the presenting officer, the clerk must ensure that the panel considers what bearing that evidence may have on all appeals. When multiple appeals are grouped, the presenting officer's case is usually heard in the presence of all the appellants at the hearing. The appellant's cases are then heard individually without the presence of other appellants. In the next module, Part 5, we will explain more details about infant class size appeals.